rotation and drawing the image after the rotation occurs. So if we use this Ferris wheel again, once again, as the example, it says the starting position is at 2, 0. And we are going to consider that our x, y position is our starting position, or our original. A rotation of 90 degrees clockwise will move the car to, so if I take this yellow car and I'm moving it 90 degrees clockwise, it moves it to 0, negative 2. Okay, well, if we do that, 0, negative 2, it flip-flopped the x and the y, and it also did the negative, or the opposite of the x, because it changed that 2 to negative 2. The problem is, when they use a coordinate with 0, it kind of sometimes will mess it up. So let's say the cart was originally here at 1, 1. If I do 90 degrees clockwise, the image would be at 1, negative 1. So it did just switch this second one to the opposite sign. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry about that. Okay, so now let's look at our next one. Our next one says that we are doing a 180 degree rotation. Remember, it doesn't matter which direction, they'll both end up with the same image. So if I do a 180 degrees rotation, there's 90, there's 180 degrees. That cart is now at negative 2, 0. So if I look here, they did the opposite of x, and it looks like they just have the same y, because 0 doesn't have an opposite. But if I look at it this way, let's say I take this right here, and I go 180 degrees, that's 1, 1. 180 degrees would be at negative 1, 1, negative 1. So it actually did the opposite of both of them. So a rotation of 180 degrees will do the negative of x and the negative of y to find your new coordinates. A rotation of 270 degrees, and we're going to go clockwise. So let me get this back to the original. Okay, and now we're going to go 270 degrees. So there's 90, 180, 270. So when I do that, my new coordinates are at 0, 2. Okay, again, that looks just like they just did the opposite of y, x, but let's take a different example. So let's say I start with the original at 1, 1 again, and I'm going 270 degrees. So there's 90, 180, 270. So it would be at negative 1, 1. So if I look there, it switched them, like we said, the y and the x, but this y is now the opposite of the original. So this should be a negative y, x. So we need to make sure we remember those and come back to those in order to find the points for our new image after each rotation. So our next example here says the triangle shown on a coordinate plane. Rotate the triangle 180 degrees clockwise about the origin. Then draw and label the image of A prime, B prime, C primes under the rotation and complete the table of coordinates. Okay, in order to do this, there's several ways, but if you can remember the shortcut up above, that's the quickest. But if you don't, this is how you are going to complete it. It says join A to O. So we're going to do that with a line, A to O. And this is just so I can show you why it works. Okay. And then it says with O as the center, measure 180 degrees clockwise. So 180 degrees. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to extend it out. 180 degrees. Okay, and then you have to remember that this distance from O to A has to be the same from O to A prime. So that will help me get my location if I can figure out how to move this. so if I notice from O to A is 20. So if I move it 20 up here, that puts my point directly on the black line here. And remember, it has to be on that black line, and I'm going to have to move this because it won't let me write over it. Right there. So that makes it 180 degrees. That's why I drew the black line to get the correct angle. And then I measured, and this segment has to be congruent to this. So that point is where A prime now is. Okay, so I'm going to delete some things here so then I can find the location of another point. I just want to show you again how to use it using the ruler. So again, now I go from C to O, and then I extend my line out, and this is easy because it's on an axis. So it's going to have to, C is going to fall somewhere on this black line. Because C is 1, 2 from the origin, it would be 1, 2 from the origin this way, which would be C prime. B is the same thing. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 away. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4 away, and that is B prime. And then you connect it all to make the triangle, and that's what your triangle would look like after 180 degrees rotation. Okay, some students would rather not do it that way. They would rather remember that 180 degree rotation moves it, if we look back at our notes, does the opposite of X, the opposite of Y. So if I look down here, the opposite of X is -2, the opposite of Y is 1. B would be the opposite of X is -4, the opposite of 0 is just 0. The opposite of 2 is -2, the opposite of 0 is 0. So now if I check to see if I did my drawing correct, A prime should be at -2, 1, -2, 1. B prime should be at -4, 0. And C prime should be at -2, 0. So as you notice, I got the same points. The way I did it down here was algebraically remembering this rule. Up here I had to draw. What I would suggest is if you remember these rules to use that, and that's what I'm going to use from here on out are those rules. So you might want to put them on a note card or somewhere that they're easily accessible. Okay, so here's our next one. We're doing 90 degrees clockwise. So if I look back at my notes, 90 degrees clockwise takes the original X, Y, and maps it onto Y, -X. So Y is 3, -X is -2. B was at 2, 1, so B prime, Y is 1, the opposite of X is -2. C was at 3, 1, C prime then should be at 1, -3. So I'm just flip-flopping them and doing the opposite of X because that's what our rules showed that we needed to do. So now I have those, I can come over here and I don't have to worry about drawing with my straight edge, finding the location and the angle. I could just draw them in using those rules. So I have 3, -2. And that is A prime. And don't forget, you need to label the shape. 1, -2 is B prime. And 1, -3 is C prime. And that is my new triangle. If I were to take this paper and rotate it 90 degrees clockwise, that is what the triangle would look like after that rotation. Okay, our next one is a flag, and it gives you the positions of the original points, and it wants to know what it would look like after a 180 degree rotation to begin with. So 180 degree rotation takes the original XY and maps it onto -X, -Y. So -X would be -2, -Y is -2. -3, -3, -4, -2, -3, -1. They stay in the same order, you just do the opposite of what was originally done. So now negative 2, negative 2. And that's A prime. Negative 3, negative 3 is B prime. C prime is negative 4, negative 2 is C prime, and negative 3, negative 1 is D prime. So that square would be rotated to this position after 180 degrees. So if you took your paper and turned it 180 degrees, that's where it would be located. The next part then says to rotate it 270 degrees counterclockwise. So 270 degrees counterclockwise. We don't have a shortcut for that. But if I'm going 270 degrees counterclockwise, that's the same as 90 degrees clockwise. So we use our rule for 90 degrees clockwise, which is x, y maps onto y, negative x. So y, and you have to make sure you're looking at the original because we're rotating the original still. Oh, actually we're not. It says, if I read carefully, find the coordinates of the image and draw the image after 270 degrees clockwise. So I'm starting with the image. I apologize for that. You have to read the directions very carefully, which I obviously need to work on as well. So we're taking the x, we do the y, which is negative 2. The opposite of x is 2. On B primes, it was negative 3, 3, so it would be negative 3, 3. C prime was negative 4, negative 2, so now it's going to be negative 2, 4. And our last one was negative 3, negative 1, so it's going to be negative 1, 3. So if I draw that negative 2, 2, and don't forget this is now A double prime, negative 3, 3, would be B double prime, negative 2, 4, oops, which I'm going to have to move this out of your way, I apologize for that, negative 2, 4 would be C double prime, and D double prime is negative 1, 3. Okay, so if I think about it, that was 270 degrees counterclockwise from the image it said to start with. Okay, our next one here says it does a 90-degree rotation counterclockwise. So 90 degrees counterclockwise, if you can remember our rule, x, y maps onto negative y, x. So negative y, x, negative y, x, negative y, x, negative y, x. So then I draw that. Negative 2, negative 4 is D prime. Negative 3, negative 2 is E prime. Negative 2, 0 is F prime. And negative 1, negative 2 is G prime. So our image after a 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation would look like that. Your guided practice is page 82, 5 through 6. You need to look at the page for the directions to see what you do on number 5 and number 6. Your assignment then is page 84 through 85, 4 through 7.